now I got to get my thoughts together and go tell the monkeys. I'm sure they're going to be a little upset, maybe a little worried about what the future's going to bring, because everybody seems to think that, one man can take down the mountain, but I don't believe that.
For years, Richard Rawlings looked untouchable. Loud cars, louder confidence, and a hit show that seemed destined to run forever. Fast and Loud wasn't just television, it was a lifestyle. A brand, an empire built on burnout, bravado, and the promise that hustling harder always pays off. Until one day, it didn't. When the cameras stopped rolling, fans noticed something unsettling. No final farewell. No triumphant ending. Just silence, followed by rumors that spiraled out of control. Was Richard fired? Did Discovery dump him? Did Gas Monkey Garage collapse behind closed doors? Or did the man who built success at full throttle finally hit a wall he couldn't outrun? What people didn't see were the cracks forming long before the finale aired. The pressure to perform a version of himself that never slept. The deals that looked massive on screen but came with invisible chains. The businesses that expanded too fast just as the world shut down. And the personal toll of living life permanently in fifth gear. Richard Rawlings didn't vanish. He made a choice, one that cost him money, fame, stability, and comfort. This isn't a story about failure, it's a story about walking away from everything you built. Because staying would have destroyed you. And once you hear what really happened after Fast and Loud, you'll understand why Richard Rawlings' quiet exit was louder than any engine he ever built. Before the fame, before the cameras, before Gas Monkey became a global brand, Richard Rawlings was already addicted to speed, not just cars, but life itself. He wasn't born into Hollywood privilege or television polish. He came up rough, restless, and stubbornly independent, flipping cars, hustling deals, and chasing adrenaline wherever he could find it. That raw energy is what Fast and Loud bottled and sold to millions, but the same fire that built his empire also quietly began burning it down. What viewers never saw was how quickly success changed the rules. Once the show exploded, engine builds weren't just builds anymore. They were deadlines. Creativity turned into obligation. Every argument had to be louder, every joke sharper, every win more dramatic. Richard wasn't just running a garage. He was performing a character version of himself day after day. A caricature that never slept, never slowed down, and never showed fear. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted. As the show's popularity grew, so did expectations from the network. More drama, bigger deadlines, higher stakes, less room to say no. The garage that once represented freedom began to feel like a cage with bright lights and microphones. Even simple business decisions had to pass through layers of production approval. Authenticity slowly gave way to formula, and Richard felt it slipping. Then came the expansion, fast and aggressive. Gas Monkey Bar and Grill, merchandise lines, licensing deals, public appearances. From the outside, it looked like unstoppable growth. On the inside, it was chaos. Each new venture demanded time, money, and energy. And when COVID hit, the house of cards suddenly shook. Restaurants closed. Revenue streams dried up. Costs didn't stop just because the cameras did. For the first time in years, Richard faced something he couldn't horsepower his way through: uncertainty. Without guaranteed TV checks, financial reality hit hard. Not bankruptcy, but vulnerability. Deals needed restructuring. Staff had to be let go. Locations were shuttered. And for a man whose identity was built on winning loudly, making quiet retreat felt like public humiliation. At the same time, his personal life was unraveling. A high-profile marriage ended in divorce, bringing emotional strain and public scrutiny. The nonstop grind finally caught up to his health too. Long nights, stress, and years of pushing limits took a toll that no custom build could fix. Richard was forced to ask himself a question he'd avoided for decades. What happens when the chase isn't worth the cost anymore? That question haunted him as Fast and Loud neared its end. The network wanted more seasons. More of the same. More noise. More exhaustion. But Richard was already running on empty. Walking away felt insane. Staying felt dangerous. So he made the most unexpected decision of his career. He stepped off the biggest platform he'd ever had without a victory lap, without an ending speech, and without certainty about what came next. To fans, it looked like disappearance. To Richard, it was survival. This wasn't the fall of a stardot, it was the moment a man chose himself over the machine that made him famous. And that choice changed everything that came after. After Richard Rawlings walked away from Fast and Loud, the outside world expected chaos, public meltdowns, lawsuits, or a dramatic comeback announcement. Instead, there was something far more unsettling: silence. For a man known for noise, bravado, and non-stop motion, going quiet felt wrong. That silence fueled speculation, and the rumors quickly turned brutal. Some claimed Discovery pushed him out. Others said Gas Monkey Garage was collapsing. A few even whispered that Rawlings had lost everything. The truth sat somewhere in the middle, uncomfortable, unglamorous, and far more human without the safety net of a long-running TV contract. Rawlings was suddenly doing something he hadn't done in years, running businesses without cameras paying the bills. Gas Monkey Garage was still alive, but it was no longer insulated by television money. Builds had to make sense financially, not just visually. Sponsorships became harder to secure. The excitement that TV once guaranteed now had to be earned the old-fashioned way. Then the pandemic hit. COVID wasn't just a setback, it was a reckoning. The Gas Monkey Bar and Grill shut down permanently, a move that shocked fans who saw it as a symbol of his empire. Staff cuts followed. Expansion plans vanished overnight. Rawlings later admitted that a lot of ventures grew too fast because success made him feel invincible. When the world stopped, reality didn't. What hurt most wasn't the financial loss, it was the identity shift. Richard Rawlings had become synonymous with winning loudly. Stepping back, downsizing, and choosing caution felt like failure, even when it wasn't. He wasn't broke, but he wasn't bulletproof anymore. And for the first time, he had to publicly accept limits. Behind closed doors, reinvention was already happening. Instead of chasing another high-octane car show, Rawlings began leaning into projects where he had control. Smaller crews. No fake deadlines. No forced drama. His Netflix series Parse-Q Rawlings surprised fans by showing a calmer, more reflective side. Less yelling, more curiosity. That wasn't accidental. It was intentional. At the same time, Rawlings was quietly reevaluating his life. Years of non-stop hustle had created distance, from relationships, from health, from peace. A painful divorce had already cracked the armor, and the absence of cameras forced honesty. He wasn't angry anymore. He was tired. Richard started talking openly about burnout, something he never would have admitted during his Fast and Loud peak. He slowed his pace, cut distractions, and chose projects that excited him rather than exhausted him. Some fans mistook that for fading away. In reality, he was rebuilding from the inside out. The world loves dramatic crashes, but what Richard Rawlings went through was slower and harder. It was dismantling an empire in public, so he could save the man who built it. And while it didn't look like success on Instagram or television, it was the most honest chapter of his life. By the time Richard Rawlings began resurfacing publicly, the biggest change wasn't the projects he chose, it was the man himself. The explosive, constantly on persona that once defined him had softened. Not in ambition, but in urgency. He no longer needed to be everywhere at once or the loudest voice in every room. That shift confused longtime fans, especially in an industry that thrives on spectacle. Rawlings slowly re-entered the public eye on his own terms. Guest appearances, controlled interviews, and selective partnerships replaced the relentless grind of weekly television. He still built cars. He still raced. But now the spotlight followed him rather than owning him. The difference was subtle, but crucial. Financially, things stabilized, though not without scars. Walking away from a hit series meant walking away from predictable money. Rawlings admitted that independent income swings were brutal at first. There were months of progress and months of doubt. But unlike before, every decision came with personal consent instead of contractual obligation. That alone was worth the risk. Gas Monkey Garage evolved again. Fewer spectacle builds. More intentional projects. Less yelling for ratings, more focus on craft. It wasn't about impressing millions anymore. It was about enjoyment, something Richard admitted he'd almost forgotten. Success no longer meant expansion. It meant sustainability. Public perception, however, lagged behind reality. Online comments mocked the quieter pace. He fell off, some said. Others accused him of losing his edge. What they missed was that survival doesn't always look aggressive. Sometimes it looks boring. And boring, for someone who has lived on the edge for decades, is revolutionary. Privately, Rawlings focused on health and balance. Years of stress, long nights, and pressure had caught up with him. He began cutting back on the behaviors that once defined his image. Less chaos. More self-awareness. He wasn't chasing longevity for a brand anymore. He was chasing it for himself. That internal shift changed how he measured success. No longer by view counts or headlines, but by time. Time to think. Time to build. Time to breathe. Time that fame never allowed him when fast and loud was at its peak. Richard Rawlings didn't reinvent himself to impress the public. He did it to survive. His own success, the irony is brutal. The moment he finally found peace was the moment the world stopped watching as closely. But peace doesn't need an audience, and as Rawlings himself has hinted, stepping away was never the end of his story, though it was the first time the story actually belonged to him. Today, Richard Rawlings exists in a strange space, less visible than before, but more grounded than ever. The man once defined by chaos, deadlines, and television drama now moves with quiet intent. There's no desperate comeback tour, no loud announcement demanding attention. And that more than anything tells the real story. Rawlings still works, still creates, still hustles, just without surrendering his life to the grind that nearly consumed him. Gas Monkey remains alive as a brand, but it no longer tries to be everything to everyone. The days of runaway expansion are gone. What's left is something rarer: control. When asked about returning to mainstream television, Rawlings hasn't ruled it out, but it would have to be on his terms. No manufactured fights. No forced timelines. No pretending exhaustion is entertainment. Fame taught him what money can buy, and what it quietly takes in return. Fans who grew up watching Fast and Loud often see his absence as a loss. In reality, it was a trade. He exchanged visibility for peace, predictable checks for ownership, applause for autonomy. And while the internet loves dramatic endings, life almost never provides them. Richard Rawlings didn't flame out, he didn't fail, he didn't lose his edge, he chose a different kind of victory, one that doesn't trend, doesn't shout, and doesn't need validation. The truth is uncomfortable. Walking away from success can be harder than chasing it. It means facing who you are without the noise, without the praise, without the excuse of momentum. And in that silence, without the excuse of momentum. Rawlings found something he hadn't had since before the cameras arrived. Clarity. So what really happened to Richard Rawlings after Fast and Loud? He survived fame, he outgrew it, and he kept going, just in a direction few expected.